It is Friday, June 9th, 2017, and welcome to the first video log of Writing for Rookies, the only podcast dedicated to the careers of science fiction, comic book, and other genre writers, particularly for the aspiring set. I am Brandon Easton, and today we're going to talk about something that some folks have known how lately things haven't kind of gone my way in my writing career, specifically for my television writing career. Every year you see a massive tidal wave of writers and agents and managers attempt to get their clients and themselves staffed on major network shows, cable shows, and digital series. Now, they say that staffing season lasts from pretty much all year long because you have all these shows being created. But the reality of the situation is it really runs from the end of April to about the middle of June. And if you haven't gotten staffed in that 45-day span, you're probably not getting staffed that year. So it is a very painful, dark, troubling time to be a writer, particularly in Los Angeles, because if you don't have anything else to fall back on, if you don't have a secondary career or your parents aren't subsidizing your income and subsidizing your life, basically, you will be in a rough spot, and it leads to a lot of darkness. So what I'm going to talk about today specifically is ways to deal with the darkness of a writing career, particularly a TV writer in Hollywood, Los Angeles, whatever you want to call it, the industry. So I'll give you a little bit of background on how a lot of this works and how we approach this every year to give you some context. So specifically for television, you basically have to have a manager and or an agent. And what happens is you have a spec script, usually a pilot, or a spec script meaning a sample of a show that you know the world of very well, that you have a good voice for that world. And you write, let's say, a sample of Law & Order SUV or Gotham or Arrow or Grey's Anatomy or This Is Us or Shades of Blue or whatever it is you are into. And those samples, usually an original pilot sample and a spec sample, can be used to basically sell you to a showrunner so that you'll be hired for that year. It is a very brutal process, not unlike the Hunger Games, where you have to use every resource in your repertoire in order to get hired. And the reality of it is, if you don't have luck, really good connections, and or really good reps who are very deeply connected, and even if they are deeply connected, it doesn't always do anything. You have to have a perfect storm of things going right in your favor in order for you to get staffed during staffing season. And it's a lot of near misses. There's a lot of not hearing back from people. And the rule of thumb basically is if you don't hear back from someone, you probably aren't getting hired. People who are excited about you and want to hire you usually let people know very quickly in the process if they want to bring you on or if they want to bring you back for a second interview, which usually leads to staffing. And I've had so many meetings, particularly last year, and so many near misses over the last 18 months that after I stopped working on Agent Carter or the show got canceled, whatever you want to say, it's been really rough. And it's very difficult not to fall into this space of self-loathing and self-doubt. And you have to find ways of building yourself up without being egotistical and being a douchebag, basically. You have to find a way of re-engaging the best parts of you without it being like this fake, puffery, this fake kind of building yourself up, and you don't want to be a jerk about it. You just want to find a way of reclaiming your self-esteem without crossing the line into being an arrogant jackass. And that's a line that all of us struggle with, because writers can simultaneously be the most arrogant and most insecure people on the face of the planet at the same time. All these things existing in the same person can drive you mad. So maybe that's why there's so many mentally broken people walking around Los Angeles, because this town can break you very easily if you don't have a support network and the strength of character and the strength of self-belief, was again, without crossing into arrogance and douchebaggery, to survive. And it is a very dark, mean, and cold, uncompromising place, unforgiving place if you're not prepared to deal with it. And a lot of it has to do with having not only strong coping mechanisms, but you also have to have, again, a very strong support network of friends and colleagues who understand who you are and what you're trying to accomplish. It helps to have a significant other, gay, straight, lesbian, whatever the hell you are, having somebody in your life who loves you and who is willing to support you, and even sometimes financially, which is a very hard thing to accept if you're used to being an independent person who doesn't like to ask for help or doesn't like to ask for favors, particularly financial ones. It's not easy. And it hurts sometimes because you can sit there and think that you've got it all made and you've got it all figured out. But at the end of the day, you'll wind up having to ask somebody to help you pay your rent. You'll wind up having to ask somebody to help you pay a bill, a car payment, an insurance payment, things that are not easy. And these are all part of the overwhelming cloud of darkness that can exist around you when you're trying to build your career as specifically a television writer in LA. And in my particular case, I can say I'm lucky or just very determined and willing to make a lot of sacrifices because I have a comic book writing career. I mean, I write Mobile Armored Strike Command for IDW, M.A.S.K, the 80s reboot comic series for Hasbro and IDW. I do Vampire Hunter D for Unified Pictures and Stranger Comics. I have a bunch of other little freelance gigs here and there that kick in that help me stay alive. And I've said this 1,000 times. If I did not have my comic book writing career, I honestly don't know where I would be. I might be living in a car, living on people's couches. I know really talented, smart, brilliant people who have been forced to live in their car or forced to live on couches and depend on the kindness of other people, for better or for worse. And these are things that really have to happen. If I didn't have my writing, my comic book career, I would probably be working some horrible retail job. And nothing against people who work retail, but I worked retail for 15 years of my life, off and on, and it's a horrible thing because, particularly in LA, where this is such a class-based city, and you are completely looked down upon when you have to work in a service position, and it eats at your soul. And I'm not saying that as a critique of anybody who has to work retail. It's just the way it's set up. Retail sucks ass, and I don't recommend that for anybody, And I'm glad I don't, for now, knocking on wood, I don't have to go back to that for now. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? Hopefully not. But to give this proper context, let me give you a little bit of background on who I am and where I've been and what my situation is. So, as I mentioned before, I worked on Marvel's Agent Carter Season 2. I wrote episode number 207, a pivotal episode. It was a great moment in my life to actually work on a real TV show in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or as a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The real beginning of that story, I guess, starts in 2014. And at the end of 2014, people who know me know that I had a really bad series of events. Basically, from San Diego Comic-Con 2014 until December 2014, it felt like my career as a writer, particularly in comics, had ended. Even though I was an Eisner Award nominee for my work on Watson and Holmes issue number 6, I was nominated for Best Single Issue or One Shot. Nothing came of me getting that Eisner nomination. Nothing. And that was kind of a kick in the pants. I felt that achieving that would have at least pushed the needle in my favor in a lot of places, but it did absolutely nothing. In fact, things seemed worse for me after that Eisner nomination than it was before. So leading toward the end of 2014, my life was not very good, and I had honestly no idea what was going to happen to me. I applied in the spring of 2014 to the TV writing programs that exist in Hollywood. Some people call them derisively so diversity programs, but they're not really diversity programs. They emphasize diversity, but anyone can enter and anyone can basically get selected, and anyone has. I mean, all kinds of people have won the various programs or gotten accepted into them, and they include CBS, NBC, now HBO, ABC is the one I was in. Nickelodeon has one, and there's a few others scattered here and there, but those are the ones that people really think about, the ones that Fox also has one, forgive me for forgetting that. and Warner Brothers. And these are all the major writing programs that exist. And the point of them is to get people who have been locked out of the Hollywood system of TV writer development to get a shot at being a part of the system, being a part of the industry. And what I mean by being shut out of the TV writer development pipeline is that it's very difficult to break in to be a TV writer. And the diversity numbers are not great, and they've actually gotten worse in the last couple of years. And by diversity, I mean anybody who's not a straight white man over the age of 40, or anyone who's not a straight white man, period. The industry in and of itself, particularly TV, at the highest levels, and I mean by executive producer and showrunners, is still majority white men. And those white guys mainly hire their friends or people somehow connected to them within their circles of influence or spheres of influence or in their bubble, their Venn diagram of associates. And that, to be in the center of a Venn diagram, to be hired, you have to meet a ridiculous amount of criteria or know a ridiculous amount of the right people who could put you into the middle of that, like, little tiny center of that Venn diagram of associates and spheres of influence. So let's say a typical way to break it down or to demystify it, but let's say you start off as an assistant at an agency, CAA, UTA, WME, ICM, any agency. There's plenty of them out there. And you start off as an agent's assistant or in a mailroom. And then over time, you get promoted to their desk and you are assisting an agent of influence who knows a lot of people, who has a lot of powerful clients. And then eventually you reach a point where you either going to be promoted within the agency to stay in the agency, or if your goal is to become a writer or work somewhere else in development or in a studio system or a studio lot or production company, then you basically get promoted out of the agency, meaning that your agent, your boss, or somebody within your agency will recommend you as a writer's production assistant or writer's assistant to a major writer or producer or showrunner. This process can last anywhere between 1 to 5, sometimes 10 years, depending on who you know, who you are, and so forth and so on. But that's the so-called traditional route in. Usually they take younger people, meaning that folks fresh out of college, so you might be in your early 20s or even some cases late teens, and you get slotted into these positions, and then you end up in a writer's room as an assistant for a couple of years. And then what winds up happening is if you've shown any proficiency, or sometimes you don't even have to show proficiency, the people just have to like you. And because I know so many people, and I'm not disrespecting, I'm not going to name them, but there's a lot of people who came up that way who are not very talented, but they are very well liked. And what winds up happening is they get hired into writer's assistants, and then they become a staff writer, which on the chart or the hierarchy of writers, it's staff writer, story editor, executive story editor, co-producer or producer level. Use co-producer, then you get producer level, then you become executive producer or EP, also known as showrunner. Sometimes EPs are not showrunners because there's stuff going on behind the scenes in the business, blah, blah, blah. But generally speaking, that's the hierarchy. So it's staff writer, story editor, executive story editor, producer or co-producer. I think it's co-producer, producer, then executive producer / showrunner. That's your steps. So a person will be a writer's assistant or a writer's production assistant or whatever, or sometimes even script coordinator, and they can make the jump over to being a staff writer. Staff writers is the lowest so-called position, but once you're in the room, you're in the room, and that's where you start. So after you're a staff writer, in theory, if your show does well, you get asked back, and you might get a bump up to story editor. Or if the show gets canceled, or they just decide they don't want to bring you back, you could still, in theory, end up on another show very quickly, or you get bumped up to another show because the producers liked you. You might not have been a fit for that room for another year, or like I said, if the show got canceled. But if enough people like you and want to recommend you, you can easily move from one show to the other during staffing season. And there's a lot of politics to that. There's a lot of racial politics to that. There's a lot of gender politics to that. There's a lot of sexual orientation politics to that, which is a topic of that could be a documentary on Netflix that lasts 3 or 4 years, talking about the internal politics of hiring practices in TV, alone. You could just talk about that forever, right? So once you, in theory, get through all that, then you get hired again. Now then, what happens to a lot of people is the show either they get fired, or the show doesn't get picked up, it gets canceled, or the producer assume, feels like you're not a good fit for that room again. But in theory, you could get another job. But then what happens to a lot of people, and incidentally, it seems to happen to a lot of people of color, is that you don't get asked back, or if your show ends, then you're back out into the arena again, right? And then what winds up happening is you pray that you get hired as a staff writer again, or you get bumped up again as, in a writer's room. The sad fact is many of us end up in staffing season, and you'll get a lot of meetings, because generally it means people read your stuff, or somebody's doing you a favor because you've been recommended. But generally speaking, it's because people like your work. They like what you did, and they want to meet you to see what kind of person you are. And that's when things get muddy, and you don't know if you did something wrong. You don't know if you were placed in a position where you would not succeed anyway, because they don't want to hire you for a variety of reasons you know nothing about. Sometimes, again, it could be racial, it could be gender-based, but there are also other things that they're looking for a room. So you don't always want to just dive into the thought that, okay, they didn't hire me because they're racist, or they're sexist, or homophobic, or they don't like whatever, fat people, right? You don't want to end up in that thought process. But sometimes that is the case, and you just don't know it. Because I know of situations where people have gotten hired because they knew the right people and somebody made a call for them. And they might not have been the most qualified, but somebody liked them enough to do that. Then I know situations where people have gone into meetings with all the momentum in the world, and they had meetings that they thought they knocked it out the park, only to never hear from that showrunner or producer again, meaning that somewhere along the line they decided not to hire you. And you don't know you don't know why you weren't hired. You don't understand always the mechanism of that, but it's the reality. So when you're in that place and those weeks go by, those 45 days, those very important 45 days between April and June that go by, and you don't get hired, you start to wonder what it is you're doing wrong. And sometimes you could have done absolutely nothing wrong. Everyone could have liked you a lot, but you just weren't a good fit for the room, because you basically have to set up a room the same way, a lot of ways setting up a family. Like, you can't really choose your family, but you can choose who you hire in a room. So sometimes showrunners want to have a certain dynamic and a certain chemistry that you might not be good for or fit for. And you have no way of knowing who that is or why that is. You don't know. All you know is that you weren't hired for that particular job. And there's really nothing you can do about that. You just have to kind of accept it. But sometimes there are things that are completely out of your control to manipulate or influence. And that's where it really starts to hurt, because you could be perfect for a certain show and perfect for a room. But if, let's say, your reps didn't say the right things, or your reps didn't do the right things, or your reps didn't put you in the right place, and this is not blaming anybody's agents or managers, but it's the reality of it. Sometimes you don't have any control over what people are saying about you, how they're selling you to a show. You don't know what that is all the time, and then you don't always get feedback. And more often than not, you will never know unless you make a really big deal about it to find out why you didn't get hired. You're not always going to be told why you didn't get staffed on a show. And that's where it starts to sting and hurt, because you don't know if you did something. And you walk around in this cloud of uncertainty that really gnaws at you over time. And it creates a kind of darkness that, again, as I said at the beginning, it fosters and it feeds self-loathing and a lack of understanding about your place in the business. And I'm going to talk about ways of getting out of that, and that's the whole real point of this, but I wanted to give a background to where I am now. So, as I was saying, I applied to the ABC program and CBS and NBC and a few others, and I didn't think, because I'd applied a bunch of times to all of them, and I didn't get in all of them, any of them over the years, but also my material wasn't great. I know that, and you have to be honest about what you're putting out. So I wasn't putting out the best material, I don't think. But then I think in 2014, I wrote really hard. I hired Jen Grisanti, who is a script consultant, one of the best in the business, to look at my spec for Arrow, which at the time was my favorite show. And I she looked at that. She looked at one of my, no, she didn't look at my pilots. I had some friends who worked in the business look at pilots, and I also had a friend of mine who was in the ABC program who gave me a lot of advice on the material you should write, how you should present yourself, and that made all the difference in the world, in my opinion. So, of course, I applied. The applications go in that year, May 2014, and you don't hear anything for months, so you just kind of forget about it. It's in the back of your head, but it's not sitting in the front, and you're not thinking, oh my God, this is what's happening for me. So by November of 2014, I swear to God, I hit rock bottom. I felt that my career was over. I couldn't get somebody to piss on me or spit on me if I was on fire. I couldn't get anybody to vomit in my direction at one point, right? So I found out around November or October of that year that I had made it to the last 26. Now, I think that year almost 1,500 to 2,000 people had applied to the ABC writing program, and then they narrow it down to 26 people who make the semis, and you have to go through this ridiculous process, and it was crazy. But I managed to get in, and I swear to God, that was one of the greatest moments of my life and career, because honestly, if I hadn't gotten into the ABC writing program, I say this with no irony, with no sympathy required, but I say this, I honestly don't know what would have happened to me in 2015 if I had not gotten into the ABC writing program. Now, what's my life been like after the ABC writing program it's been very interesting to see how I've been perceived and how I've ended up in places I have not ended up as a result of the program, right? But at the time, it was a major thing for me. And as a result, I ended up getting staffed on Marvel's Agent Carter Season 2. Being in a writer's room at that time, and I kind of want to delve into a little bit of what that was like for me, because before I had gotten into any writer's room, I know a lot of black male writers, TV writers, and they all told me the same thing, that when you're black and male, particularly a large black male in a writer's room, you cannot be yourself. You have to find a way of being completely inoffensive and completely unthreatening without seeming like you're putting on a show for people. But it's really hard for me, because to me, I feel like it's being fake and disingenuous, which people will read and judge you accordingly. So the question is, particularly if you're a large black guy in a writer's room, should you be yourself? And I don't mean going in and being a jerk or anything like that, because obviously you're not even going to make it that far if you are a jerk. But you don't know how to be, because you don't know how the dynamic of the room, and you don't know how people are going to accept you or not accept you. So I found myself in a very weird place of not knowing how to behave. And I don't know how that was read or responded to or interpreted. But I know that I was not who I am, because I was constantly afraid of saying or doing something that would be seen as angry black guy or ineffectual black guy or unintelligent black guy. And I was afraid to even sometimes say anything, because you don't want to seem stupid. And that's because, and particularly if you're awake or woke, or whatever the hell they're calling that shit now, if you're just an aware black person, you know that you are judged harshly and harsher than a white guy. Like, if you're a white dude and you go in a writer's room and you're a jackass, you could still get hired next year, And white guys I've seen disrupt rooms, walk out of that room and get handed shows. And they're not even the most talented guys. But if you're a black dude and you're a jackass, you will literally never work again. If you're a black dude and don't do anything wrong and you're a good worker, you still may never work again. If you're a black guy and you contribute to the room and you don't do anything wrong, people will go around saying you're a know-it-all. It's weird. And I think, and this is not making excuses for myself, but I do believe that people, particularly in LA, in Hollywood, in the industry, so to speak, don't realize how deep their anti-black male bigotry goes. I don't think people realize how much they don't realize how deeply bigoted they can be. And I'm not talking about making jokes and having fun in a writer's room. I mean folks who sit around thinking of themselves as progressives, as liberals, not realizing how deeply their bigotry and racism is. And so when they're in a position where they're dealing with a black guy or a black person for the first time, they don't know how to respond. They don't know how to behave. They don't know how to act because their whole existence has been based around pretending that they're not racist or they're not bigoted. So what will happen is you will be judged for any little thing. There's like a microscope placed over you, and it's very difficult to address it. It's very difficult to deal with it without somebody thinking of you as an angry black guy or a guy being a racist asshole black douchebag, in quotes, because you are reacting to how people are treating you and so forth and so on. But that's a whole other discussion. So getting back to that, so I felt that I did the best job I could being a first-time writer, never being in a room before, never being on a one-hour show, never dealing with the dynamics of a room. I thought that I had done a good job, and I still think I did. But you just don't know what people really think because people don't really tell you. So coming out of Agent Carter, I felt at the time I had a ridiculous amount of momentum going for me. And for reasons I'm not going to get into in this particular conversation, things didn't work out for me. By the 4th of July weekend of 2016, I had not gotten staffed. And I had so many meetings in the summer and spring of 2016 that I thought it was a shoo-in. I mean, every meeting wasn't great, but honestly, I can say without, any kind of embellishment, no hyperbole, that 85% of the meetings I had, and I'm talking about I had like damn near 25 maybe meetings over the course of that summer, of that time, 85% of them were absolutely fantastic. I felt like I had really hit it out the park. And as I got closer to June and toward the end of June, I started reaching out to people I knew, and they said, yeah, I had a lot of meetings too, and I didn't get hired. And one of my friends or colleagues who was a producer on Agent Carter, I talked to him, and he was just like, look, you're forced to go on a bunch of meetings or shows you don't care about, but you don't want to not get staffed. And he was telling me how he was working on a show he didn't particularly care for, but he had to get staffed. You have to keep working, because if you don't get a gig, each year that you don't get a gig, it gets harder and harder to keep yourself relevant. So you have to either self-generate material, which is a big solution to it all, or you have to get really lucky and keep networking. And you have, and what I spoke about a while ago about how it has to be a perfect storm of events. You have to have a perfect storm of events. You have to have the right amount of people recommend you. You have to have people like you. You have to have material that people really believe in. And then you have to have a whole other set of tiny things that you have no control of just kind of go your way. And that's like type of show it is, type of showrunner. If they feel your voice will be a addition to the room or a hindrance to the room, which if they think you're a hindrance, you're never going to work, And you also have to have, and this is what I don't have, I'm not in anybody's camp. And what I mean is I didn't come up through as a writer's assistant or a production assistant or a script coordinator through a camp. And that means that there's a production company or some executive producers who consider you family. And they consider you a part of their crew, their clique. And if you're not a part of that, if you're not if you're not in the house, as they say, or part of the crew, then you will never, but it's very difficult for you to move forward, because without having the weight of executive producers constantly basically shilling for you and putting in a good word for you, you don't have a shot. It gets really hard to break that wall down when you don't have a crew, a clique, a unit, a posse of folks constantly having your back. And that does not include agents and managers, because that's what they're supposed to do. But you need people to do that of their own volition. And if you don't have that, it makes it really hard. And that's what I don't really have. I have really good friends in the business who are higher level. I have some really strong colleagues and associates. But I don't have maybe one or two people overall. But I don't have a unit, a crew of folks putting my name out there for me without me prompting them or without me constantly, basically asking for it. And when you don't have that, it gets really tough. So that's kind of where I'm at. So now we're in June of 2017. I was up for, I think, a couple of shows, but then, as I said earlier, once everything goes silent, that's not a good sign. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned right now, the silence is deafening when it comes to me and TV writing. So you exist under this cloud of self-loathing, of doubt. Your self-esteem takes a hit. You feel like you failed on some massive level. And you may have done nothing wrong. The dice just didn't roll in your direction. It's sort of like that game on The Price is Right. I think it's called Plinko, where you take that big disc and you drop it and it falls down to pins. You know what I'm talking about, that game? Well, it's kind of like that. And at the bottom, there's one little compartment that says staffed, and the rest of them is no staff, no staffing, no staffing. So it's like click, 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 click. So your chances are you're not going to get staffed, you know. And right now, if I was to like make a Plinko board of my career, it's like this little tiny, whiny little slot that says staffed, and then there's like 1,500 that say not staffed, and all the little pegs are kind of edged toward not staffed. So how do you change that, and how do you deal with it? Well, the first thing you have to do is lose any and all sense of entitlement. No matter how hard you work, no matter what you've sacrificed, no matter how hard you suffered, nobody owes you a goddamn thing. No matter how good you would be on a show. And there are shows I know that if I was in the room for, I could have made them a lot better because of my expertise and life experience and I guess talent. But if you can't get somebody to agree to hire you, if you can't get past that hump, over that wall, then there's nothing you can do about it. Once they hire that writing staff and that room gets started, what are you going to do? Complain about it, whine about it? No, you just have to move on. And moving on is the hard part because sometimes it stinks. I mean, I can tell you there were a whole bunch of shows that I was up for last year that I didn't get on, that I didn't watch this year because it hurt me to watch it, because I was just like, man, I would have loved to have been in those rooms, but I didn't get in those rooms. And it's not even a revenge thing, because it's not like me not watching is going to hurt the show, but it's more like it hurts, it really stings to see a show that you could have been perfect for on the air with a script you knew you could have written. It doesn't feel good. So you have to get over the sting of entitlement, because a lot of this is really entitlement. We believe that we're good enough. We believe that we belong, and then when you don't get it, you're looking for someone to blame. You get really angry. You get bitter. And then some people blame themselves. Some people blame the world. Like the world is somehow conspiring against them. And let me tell you, you're not that important. I'm not that important. We're not that important that the world needs to conspire against us. All we've really got to do in the long term is keep making good material and self-generating material. That includes doing a podcast, writing a novel, and I'm talking about stuff that's free. Let me get more specific. The other way out of this is to start thinking about low-cost ways of creating material that get you out there, and low cost sometimes meaning free. So almost every writer I know has a laptop, right? Might not be the fastest, might not be the best. You might not be able to run a video game on it, right? But if you have a laptop that works, a laptop that has very basic rudimentary internet access that is not like dial-up slow, if you have word processing programs and script writing programs like Final Draft, Movie Magic, or Celtics or Celtics, if you have Microsoft Word or whatever the hell you could use on the, I don't know what Apple uses, whatever. But if you've got that, then you've already got most of what you need, because it costs you nothing to write a novel or write a play or write a screenplay. Now, it costs time and it costs talent and effort. But beyond that, it doesn't actually cost you anything other than, your electric bill or so forth and so on. But there's ways around that. Like, let's say you're at your absolute rock bottom. I'll give you an example from my life. In January of 2010, I had a fire. And I was homeless for about a month after that fire, which meant I was sleeping on couches. I was sleeping in people's cars. And I still had jobs. I had two jobs. I was teaching, and I was working retail at GameStop and Barnes & Noble at the time. I had 3 jobs, and I still had to go to them, but I had no place to live, and I still had to write and create. And so on days when I was off, which strangely enough, I did have days off despite having 3 jobs, because they were horrible jobs, I would go to a Starbucks or a cafe or the public fucking library and write. Any place that had a plug and Wi-Fi access, I would go. And if I had like $10 in my pocket, I would make sure, like if I went to a diner or a cafe, I would spend money so they couldn't kick me out. So I would order a few things during the course of the day. I don't want to be that guy who orders 1 cup of tea and milks the place all day long. I think that's a kind of a shitty thing to do, even if you're broke. So I made sure that I had a little bit of money in my pocket, even if I have to borrow money to go to these places. So I still did that. So if you're at the bottom of your barrel, and I know there are TV writers out there and writers in general who are living hand to mouth, who have to live off the kindness of other people. I know how it is because I was there. So I'm not talking from a perspective of not knowing. I know what it's like to struggle and hustle in this town. But one of the key rules of LA is that nobody really gives a shit about what you're going through. All they care about is what you have to offer. And that sucks. But it's the reality of it. This is not the place where you can expect people to feel sorry for you. Because this is one thing I've learned about LA. More so in the industry. Because I really can't speak with eloquence on what it's like to grow up here because I'm not from LA. But I will say that people, once they know that you're struggling, and once they know that you're going through shit, and if you get online and start whining about it and bitching and complaining about it, make videos whining and bitching and complaining about how things didn't go your way, most people will think, oh, that's really sad, and they'll give you some words of encouragement. But in the back of their mind, and this is something that most people won't say because they're way too polite or they're afraid of seeming like an asshole, but a lot of people will be like, yeah, that's really sad and good luck and I hope everything works out for you. But way deep down, a lot of them are saying, stop fucking whining, get a backbone, grow some balls, get some testicular fortitude, stop bitching and complaining. That's what people are really thinking. Even the most sympathetic and empathic people in the world will still be deep down asking you to stop, because people want to see you succeed, and you don't succeed by whining and complaining. You succeed by doing, by finishing what you start and creating new material constantly. And if you have a little bit of money, you could record a podcast, you could do a video blog. There are all these things you could do for free or for a very low overhead that people won't always do. And I see so many people taking so much time and whining and complaining about what isn't working for them, instead of just saying, you know what, I'm not owed anything. Sorry about the dumpster noise, because they're emptying out the dumpster right now, which is good because it smells bad. But people don't want to hear about your losing. People generally want to hear about success so they could be empowered or just feel good. And one of the things I learned is nobody really wants to hear about your whining and complaining. So instead of doing that, the best thing to do is to start creating more and build more and work really hard and just keep moving forward instead of sitting in a place of self-loathing, self-doubt. Like self-flagellation, it does not win you anything, regardless of what you see in Last Temptation of the Passion of the Christ. Self-flagellation, hurting yourself, throwing yourself at the mercy of others in the hopes that you'll get sympathy, it does not work. And people lose respect for you. And that's the reality. So for me, I went through, particularly last week, I went through some really dark times. And I posted a few things on Facebook, not to garner sympathy, but just to let people know where I was at. And it's what you go through. And now I'm a little bit better. I've gotten back on the horse, and I'm just going to keep on moving forward. But the reality is that the darkness hurts and it stings and it hangs over you like a nebula, like a cloud. It's very heavy. It's very atmospheric. It's like an anchor being tied to your shoe. And at some point, you got to take that shoe off. At some point, you've got to just say, you know what? Right now, I've got to rebuild. And when you realize that there's all these other things you can do, instead of being sad or feeling sorry for yourself, you just have to kick yourself in the ass and say, you know what, let me keep moving, and not blame the world, not blame the industry. I know that racism is a factor in this town, but how far can I go and blame that? Because there's a lot of black people who are showrunners right now. I know a whole lot of black men right now who are working as producer levels and story editor levels and running shows. So while racism does exist, I can't, be like, well, that's why I'm not getting hired. No, I have to keep creating. I have to keep doing things. And at some point, I'm going to create something that I own, that nobody can take from me, that people will want to buy and want to develop and put it on the air or put it on the web or put it on a digital platform. So instead of me feeling sad and worrying and feeling bad about the fact I didn't get staff this season so far, it's better to just recharge yourself and create. And that's all you can really do. So one step of dealing with the darkness, and a major part of it, is just keep creating new stuff, getting your feelings out, but then not living in those feelings forever. And as long as you don't do that, as long as you really take a concentrated act of strength and willpower, then you won't be worried so much about how things haven't gone your way. You won't be so worried about how you feel you're owed advancement, because you're not owed anything. None of us are. So in my particular case, I've got to keep on creating, keep on building, keep on networking. Networking in this town is hard because if you're not the type of person who likes to go into a party situation where you don't know anybody, and I'm not really good at that, you have to go into a place where people will get to know you and connect with you and build with you, so that sometime in the future, they'll be like, oh, I remember Brandon. He was so cool. We talked at a party. So what I need to do now is see if he is available. You have to start thinking outside of the box, finding other jobs, right? Like this week, I've applied to nothing but video game writing gigs, and I got a couple of interviews within a day, because I have enough of a background that people were excited about talking to me. Now, I might not get those video game writing jobs, and that's okay if I don't, but at least there's an option out. And if worse comes to worse, if my comic book career falls, if my ability to write video games falls, I have a master's degree in teaching. I used to be a history teacher. So if all else fails, I could always dip back into the educational environment. So ultimately, you have to create plan B, plan C, plan D. And none of those, A, B, C, or D, should involve whining and complaining about how the world hasn't bended to your will. So if you can get over the self-loathing, the hits to the self-esteem, the crush to your ego, the crushing blows to your ability to feel good about yourself, once you get over that, the next thing you have to do is start creating. And that's it. There's no shortcut. There's no option outside of just being the best writer you can be. Willing to accept that a lot of these slaps in the faces and failures are just a part of the system. The minute that you go into it with this expectation that things are going to go your way just because you did A, B, C, or D, or C, E, F, I'm out of it right now. I didn't have enough caffeine. If you just say, well, I checked off all these boxes, so therefore my career should go this way. The minute you start thinking like that, you're done. It's over. You simply won't make it. You've got to look at it as a larger process and realize how much control you have over your existence, how much control you have over your life. I'm not a Scientologist. I don't believe in that shit, but I don't know if Will Smith is a Scientologist, but he said some Scientology type stuff once. But the one thing Will Smith said, and I look at him as an inspiration and as a role model in some ways, but Will Smith said that, I might not be the best actor in the world, but I won't quit until I die. And he talked about how he gets on a treadmill and he'll just start running. And even if the other person is a better runner than him, he's going to stay on that treadmill until either he passes out or dies before that other person quits. And he's going to make sure that he is the last one standing on that treadmill. And I look at the world from that perspective. You don't have to be the best, but you can't give up. And it requires a rewiring of your expectations. It requires a rewiring of how you view the world. And if you can't do that, if you can't rewire yourself, if you can't pick yourself up and dust yourself off and move forward and keep creating new material, that's the key. If you can't do that, then you shouldn't be in this business. And you shouldn't try to be a TV writer or a comic book writer or a script writer or a playwright, because you're not owed anything, and people generally don't give a crap until you have something to show. And by that I mean not whining, not showing how much you can complain, not showing how much you feel the world owes you, but showing that you can fight, be a fighter, have a backbone. Don't give up just because things get tough. Don't let what other people say tear you down, because people love tearing you down. You have celebrities who are at the top of the world who win Oscars, and the very next year, the industry tears them apart. Anne Hathaway, for example. For no reason. They just like this industry. This world is a cycle of building, tearing down, building, tearing down, building, tearing down. And you shouldn't give anybody ammunition to tear you apart, to tear you down. So that's a way to beat the darkness. And I didn't mean to talk this long, because I actually had meant this to be a 2-part series, but it's not going to be a 2-part series. This is all I have to say on it. I mean, I'll get back to this, and seeing how people respond to the video version of Writing for Rookies will determine if I'm going to keep doing a video blog of the podcast. So this has been an experiment. So the podcast and this video are the same thing. So I'm going to put them both up, Writing for Rookies at .podcastpeople.com. Then I'm going to put this on my YouTube channel, and I want to put it all over my social media so that everybody knows this exists. So, and I just plan on giving more advice, and particularly talking through some of the things that we don't always get to hear, particularly the honesty about how to pick yourself up after things don't go your way. So with that being said, I'm Brandon Easton. This has been Writing for Rookies, Video Log Episode 1. I believe this is Episode 25 or 26, maybe 27 of the actual podcast. I'm sorry. Again, my caffeine intake has dropped a lot because I'm trying to re-engage with this really great diet I had. I'd lost 90 pounds, so I need to keep that up. But otherwise, if you feel free in the comments below, let me know what other topics you'd like to hear, what you would like to talk about. If you have questions you'd like me to answer, not that I'm an expert, but I'd be happy to share my experiences in the hopes that it will help you and help you think about how to deal with the business and help you re-engage your creative juices. Anything like that, please put in the comments. And then this will be a free thing, so feel free to let your friends know, and I'd really appreciate it. And as many subscribers as I could get, hopefully you guys will keep showing up. And thank you so much for listening to me if you managed to sit through this 45-minute presentation. And I hope to hear from you soon. And as always, take care of yourself, keep on writing, and do the best you can. And just be a good person, and hopefully things will turn around. And with that, thank you so much for watching. Take care.